Greetings, travelers. I'm your host, the C.the-Knows-a-lot, Dr. Waluigi. Well, it's come to this. Time to start discussing the three most controversial series in the He-Man library, considered by both fans and critics alike. We begin with a reboot that could have been a promising return of a beloved female character, if it weren't the fact that it's a ripoff of several existing franchises. This is my review of the 2018 reboot of She-Ra and the Princesses of Power.
We're warriors!
The series began development in 2016 and was held by N.D. Stevenson, lasting for 5 seasons between 2018 till 2020. His goal was to make the show more connected to its cast of characters and have them deal with themes like overcoming abuse and trauma, which led to the show receiving many awards, including Daytime Emmys, GLAAD Awards, and many others, while also being praised for helping pave the way for more shows to feature LGBTQ representation. Sadly, this show has received a lot of controversy between the fans of the original series and the fans of this series. Most of what I could find out on the topics of the controversy come from people hating the design of the characters to some of the things said by N.D. Stevenson. I want to get this out of the way in this segment. I don't hate or agree with most of the things said by many of the original series fans. In fact, I was like many who were excited to see this series because it was the first time in over 30 years that we were going to get another adaptation of She-Ra, and the trailers made it look so interesting and cool. It's just the execution of the show didn't go over so well.
We're warriors!
On the distant planet of Etheria, a young girl named Adora has finally completed her training and goes on to become a force captain for the Horde, a group of people trying to conquer the planet from what they claim are the evil princesses. However, she soon discovers that the Horde are the invaders and are trying to enslave the planet and its inhabitants. Adora then leaves them to join the Great Princess Rebellion and put a stop to their evil plans. Can she help fend off the evil Horde, and what other secrets does this world hold after Adora finds a magic sword that lets her become the Princess of Power, She-Ra?
We're warriors!
Oh boy, this isn't going to end well. Let me get this out of the way right now. The cast for this series is excellent. I think they all do a great job with the roles they're given, and I hope they have great careers down the line. But I don't think the characters in this series are that great. I know, I'm speaking blasphemy, and many of you will probably disagree with my opinions on these characters, so I beg of you, just hear me out and let me explain my viewpoints on these characters.
We're warriors!
While I can see why many people love these heroes for their designs, and most of them having much better character traits than that of the previous She-Ra series, I do feel that these characters aren't anything special because they do remind me of other characters from other series that did these types of characters better. I found Adora, voiced by Amy Camaro, herself kind of bland and boring even when they tried giving her some funny moments throughout the course of the show. Bo, voiced by Marcus Scribner, felt like the only decent and memorable male character, but even he was just regarded as the guy best friend of the group, and somehow they made Glimmer, voiced by Karen Fukuhara, the Teela of the group. She was a whiny little brat that defies and argues with her mother because they do the whole "she's a teenager and her mother knows better" trope. The other princesses aren't that much better, as they were written as one-note caricatures or were so unbelievably annoying that I wanted them to shut up. But in my opinion, the character that got the worst readaptation was Seahawk, voiced by Jordan Fisher. I mentioned that he was one of my favorite characters from the original series, and that was because he was an awesome swashbuckling adventurer who helped the rebellion by bringing them supplies from the Horde ships he destroyed. But this version of the character is a pompous dumbass that destroys his ships because he thinks that's fun. I hated the way this character was handled because instead of giving him a more interesting or maybe even fleshed out backstory, the creators decided to turn him into a glory-seeking moron that couldn't fight his way out of a paper bag.
We're warriors!
Despite the fact that this show's heroes aren't that impressive to me, the villains are the biggest improvement compared to the original. Catra, voiced by AJ Michalka, was a much more interesting and threatening character than that of her original counterpart, and had some really great character growth. Scorpia, voiced by Lauren Ash, is okay for her part in the series compared to her dumb muscle counterpart in the original. However, she wasn't a very standout character to me, and it did feel like the writers could have done more with her. I love what they did with Entrapta, voiced by Christine Woods. Yeah, I know that she's more of a heroic character, but she was a villain in the original series, so I'm adding her here for consistency. This version of the character was much more fun to watch, and she ended up being my favorite character because of her eccentricities. Even Shadow Weaver, voiced by Lorraine Toussaint, was a really intimidating villain and was given a much more interesting reason for her actions, even if her reformation was kind of forced. I really do think that this show made great strides to improve some of the heroes and villains, but it does feel like the show's creators didn't know what to do with a lot of the other characters, that they ended up either becoming forgettable or just get stuck in the background to make room for the new characters that they wrote for this show, and even those characters are forgotten after a few seasons. This includes characters from the original like Castaspella, Tongue Lasher, Grizzlor, and Leech, and the trio of people Catra and Adora trained with, just to name a few.
We're warriors.
The few things I can honestly say that were an improvement from the original series are the character designs and the animation. I won't lie and say that the original series was a very lackluster show, as it was just made to continue the He-Man franchise and sell more toys, which I will agree that a lot of the designs from that show aren't very impressive compared to today's animation standards. This show, however, did make the characters look unique enough that it's much easier to tell them apart from their very obvious toy line designs of the original. Too bad it's filled with stuff that other shows have already succeeded in doing.
We're warriors.
For all the things this show does that do make it unique and different from the original, I do feel like it takes a few steps back from making it a better version of this series. The only nitpick I have about this show is that I don't really like the background designs of Etheria. While I do praise the animators for their work on the show, these backgrounds would probably look better in Steven Universe, which the creators said inspired them for the animation, but this feels less like a show that was inspired from another show and feels like a complete ripoff, at least in the animation department. But that's only a minor nitpick compared to the three biggest problems I have with this series. The first problem is that the main villain sucks. Hordak, played by Keston John, is one of the most useless and non-threatening villains I've ever seen in any of the He-Man shows. Why? Because he just sits in the background and does nothing. Most of his screen time in this show has him brooding or working with Entrapta to help him create a portal to get back to Horde Prime in order to prove to him that he's not a failure. Which leads to Season 5 being one of the best seasons from this show, simply because the writers of this show made him this evil monster that would torture a puppy and get enjoyment out of it, rather than the original, who was a robot that was hidden behind some smoke. Unfortunately, he only shows up in Season 5 and is defeated just as easily as blowing out a candle. I will admit that Hordak is an improvement over his original series counterpart, but he acts more like an angry child that wants his daddy's love as opposed to being an actual threat. The second biggest problem I have with the show is the treatment of its male cast. This is another show that feels the need to make women look strong by making most of its male characters be one of three things: blowhards that can't do anything, background characters that only get 1 or 2 episodes to explain exposition, or cowards that never grow and stay cowards for the entire series. Which is something that the original never did. It was able to balance both male and female characters while still having a female-dominant cast. This show, however, does what several other shows with a female demographic were doing at the time, which was making the female characters look good by putting down some of the male characters. I hate that for a while some cartoons were doing this all throughout the 2010s, and it doesn't feel empowering. It feels like somebody just wanted to let out some pent-up rage they had since high school. The final thing about this show that in my opinion is weaker than the original is the lack of world building. Despite the fact this show did improve upon the characters and the animation from the original, it never improved upon the one thing that all other shows have been able to improve, or at least focus on, and that is the world building. We get very little in the way of exploring the world of Etheria, and even less on how other characters live and deal with the Horde, and stick with our main characters coming and going throughout the lands. I get that these writers wanted to focus more on the relationships of the characters, but this doesn't matter if the world they create is honestly boring and reminds you of other shows that came out around the time.
We're warriors.
So despite the fact that this show did improve upon a few of the things I said weren't handled as well in the original series, its writing and characters are reminiscent of other better shows of the time. The animation and character designs are improved upon, but the backgrounds lack any originality, and its world building is very limited and lackluster compared to the original series. I'm not going to pretend like I was this show's target demographic and that these writers cared about making a better version of the original She-Ra, but I don't think that this show belongs among the He-Man franchise because of how different it feels. I give the 2018 reboot of She-Ra a 4 out of 10. If you're interested in checking out this series because you like Legend of Korra or Steven Universe, I think that it's worth your time. But if you're looking for a show that is an improvement on the original series, you're still gonna have to wait. Thanks for watching, I'm Dr. Waluigi, and remember, don't judge a book by its cover, cause you'll never know what's inside. Good night, everyone.
We're warriors.